starting off, there are two different ways that you can create the model to send information to GA4, either through Google Tag or Google Tag Manager. They're very, very similar. I'm just going to go through the Tag Manager version, which is very, very similar to the Google Tag version. So the GA4 e-commerce model, at its heart, has something called the items array. The items array. So if you've been working with e-commerce, you may have heard of that. And it may sound a little bit frightening, but it's really not. In this items array, we have two items, and an array can be one or more items. That's what an array means in programmers speak. And we have one item that's in this one set of brackets, and we have a second item here. So in our items array, we have right here two different items. And we're talking about the product that we're selling or that we're viewing or that we're purchasing or whatever. It's going to have either the item ID or the item name. And in the items array, for each item in that array, you have to use either the ID or the name. That's required. If you don't have those, then your items array is not going to work. After that, you really can put in pretty much whatever you want. You can use whatever the parameters or these items of information that you want. You don't have to use them all, but use as many as makes sense in your scenario. So for example, maybe there's a coupon on this item with a discount, but you might include the brand or the category. You can have up to 5 different categories that you break it down. And in the categories, typically, they go from, great big categories down to smaller. In this example, apparel, adult, shirts, crew, short sleeves. You can see you're going further down the line. And I'm sure you're familiar with this with any clothing e-commerce site that you've been out on. You can, you're shopping for men's or whatever going down. Google really wants you to stick to their procedure for e-commerce. They want you to use the e-commerce model. They have accommodated some minor variations. So for example, they're saying that the price should be put in as a number, and the same with quantity. Now, in fact, if you put that in as a string, as if it were text, with a double quote around it, the Google e-commerce model is actually smart enough to recognize that a 1 with a double quote around it is the same thing as a number 1 without the double quotes. Same with the quantity. So there's a tiny bit of flexibility with the model, but not much. The other place that there is a tiny bit of flexibility, which really surprised me, I didn't know this until recently, but if your developers just call this ID and name, that'll work also. And I was shocked when I discovered that worked, but it does. Regardless, even though there is some variation to how Google lets you use the e-commerce side, just use the e-commerce model as defined here. So things are strings or numbers. How you're going to fill out the items array. If there's some information, additional information that you want that is not one of the standard parameters here, you can actually add that in the free version of GA4. You can add up to 10 custom dimensions, 10 custom parameters in here to track what's significant or what's important about your specific e-commerce implementation. So feel free to expand on this, but when possible, use the parameters that are already in the model. There are different scopes around items or parameters within GA4. There can be user scoped, which is typically something that applies to a user regardless of how many times they log in. So if I log into a website 5 different times and it identifies me, that is a user scoped and knows that it's Fred. There can be session scoped, which is just things that happen within the session that I'm on the website. There can be event scope, which is smaller, down to just one event, like a page view, and an event scoped item on a page view would be like the page title, for example. And then there's item scoped. And as you can probably guess, if you weren't familiar with that, an item scoped parameter is anything that's within the items array, whether it's one of these standard parameters here, or it's a parameter that you add. It's one of your custom parameters. So anytime you hear somebody talking about item scoped what they're talking about is something that is actually from the items array. This is the heart of the GA4 e-commerce model. Now, what do you add to that? Obviously, you're never going to send just an items array. What you're going to do is add other things around that. For example, you're going to view item details. So this is when I'm on a product detail page, for example, and what I'm doing is sending the items array. I'm looking at one specific item, but I'm also going to send along some additional information. How much is the value of this item that I'm looking at? And what's the currency? And one thing that when people move from Universal Analytics to GA4, in Universal Analytics, Google did require value. In GA4, they added the requirement of currency. You have to pass that along. And if you don't pass that along, your information won't get sent properly, won't be read properly as an e-commerce hit